Today we're jumping into the world of a parasite with a pretty wild story, a real tale of two lives. We are talking about amphistomes. Now, on the surface, they might not seem like a huge deal for livestock, but trust me, there's a deadly twist to the story that you won't see coming. So let me just start with a question for you. When do you think a parasite is at its most dangerous? Is it when it's all grown up, fully established in its host? Or is there maybe another stage that's far more threatening? Just keep that question in the back of your mind. Okay, here we go. This is the absolute heart of the paradox. Take a look at this. The adult amphistome. It hangs out in the rumen, a super tough part of a cow's stomach, and honestly, it's almost a non-issue. But the immature one, the juvenile, it sets up shop in the delicate small intestine, and its impact is, well, it's catastrophic. The threat level literally goes from minor to deadly. And that brings us right to the core of what we're talking about today, the disease called immature amphistomacies. It's a condition that isn't caused by the big adult worm you might expect, but entirely by its young. So the most important thing to get here is that while that big adult fluke might look like the enemy, it's actually the tiny, immature ones that are the real killers. This disease is a perfect and pretty scary example of why you can't judge a parasite by its adult form. For the host, that can be a fatal mistake. Right, so to really understand this threat, we've got to understand the creature itself. What exactly is an amphistome? Let's break down its anatomy a little bit. The name itself tells you almost everything you need to know. Amphi means both, and stome means mouth. So amphistome literally means both mouths. And it's named for its two key features, that oral sucker up front for feeding, and a much larger, more powerful sucker at the back end that it uses to just anchor itself in place. And this is pretty much your classic fluke blueprint. They've got this flattened, leaf-like body, and all their organs are kind of cushioned in this special tissue. They're also covered in a tough protective outer layer, like a suit of armor. And get this, they're hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female organs. For a parasite, that is a very efficient strategy for reproduction. Okay, now let's get into the life cycle. This is where you really start to see how this becomes such a massive problem. This isn't a simple A to B journey. It's more like a complex relay race that absolutely requires two different hosts to finish. This journey is just incredible. It all starts with eggs passed in the poop of an infected animal, like a cow. In the water, a tiny larva hatches, and its one and only mission is to find a very specific kind of freshwater snail. Once it gets inside that snail, the intermediate host, the parasite goes into overdrive, multiplying like crazy. A single larva can end up producing thousands of the next stage. These then swim out of the snail, attach themselves to plants, and basically turn into little infective cysts. The trap is now set for some poor grazing animal to come along and take a bite. And this is where the story takes its really dark turn. Once it's been eaten by its final host, the parasite begins its most destructive phase. This is the arrival of the plug feeder. As soon as that cyst is swallowed, it makes its way to the small intestine. There, the immature fluke hatches out and immediately, and I mean immediately, gets to work. There's no grace period, the damage starts right away. They've earned a nickname for their feeding style, and it's terrifyingly descriptive. They're called plug feeders, and that name tells you everything. Yeah, they don't just sip nutrients. They use those powerful suckers to latch onto the intestinal wall, and they literally rip out and eat chunks, plugs of tissue. This brutal feeding causes deep, open sores, tissue death, and it can even release toxins that poison the host. And in a really severe infection, this is the result: hemorrhagic duodenitis. It's a clinical term, but what it means is a bleeding, severely inflamed small intestine. It is every bit as horrible as it sounds. So the symptoms you see are a direct result of this intestinal assault. The animal just stops eating, it becomes incredibly weak, and it suffers from this persistent, nasty diarrhea. Its gut is so damaged, it can't absorb water or hang on to vital proteins. And for young animals, the mortality rate is just tragically high. So, how in the world do you fight an enemy when it does its worst damage while it's still basically invisible? Let's talk about the challenges of diagnosis and control. Now this is the real kicker, the diagnostic trap. The disease hits its absolute peak before the parasite is even old enough to lay eggs. That means by the time you could find eggs in a fecal test, the animal is either hopefully recovering or more likely it's already dead. The most dangerous phase happens in a complete diagnostic blind spot. Because of that, diagnosis becomes a bit of detective work. Vets have to look at the symptoms, they have to know if the animal has been grazing in wet, marshy areas where those snails live, and they have to consider the time of year. Tragically, a 100% confirmation often only comes after the animal has died, when they can do a postmortem exam. So, control has to be proactive. It's really a three-pronged attack. First, you use the right drugs to kill the flukes inside the animal. But that's not enough. You also have to tackle the problem outside by controlling the snail population to break that life cycle. And finally, it's about smart pasture management, basically keeping your animals away from the parasite's favorite breeding grounds. And that really brings us full circle. The key isn't just knowing about the adult worm. It's about understanding its entire complicated life story, from the egg to the snail to that blade of grass and finally to the devastating impact of its immature stage. In the end, the story of the amphistome is this hidden drama, right? With life and death stakes playing out just beneath the surface. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other natural dramas just like this one are unfolding, totally unseen in the world all around us. Thanks for joining me.